Hello and welcome to another edition of the Tigers Down Under. It's been a little while, but we're back and here to wrap up the season that has been Hull City 2018-2019. So welcome, Dan.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. It's been a little while, so I think we'll start the episode with sort of a rundown of our results since the last episode. And our last episode, we were looking ahead to pretty do or die clashes against Forest and Norwich, which would define our season. And it was the case that unfortunately two pretty significant losses to them, coupled with a fair few disappointing draws and drop points elsewhere in the remaining fixtures, would be our undoing. Um, we did have three wins in a row against Ipswich, Reading, and Wigan. The latter two, Reading and Wigan, were really great to see because we had come from behind wins against them, and then almost snatched a victory against West Brom with two cracking goals from Todd Kane. But really, the season sort of petered out into a nothingness with that loss against Sheffield United at home, which I was fortunate enough to be at. It was good to be back in Hull for that one, even if it was a loss. Um, and then a pretty controversial draw against Bristol City on the final day of the season, where really we should have won the game, but a little bit of iffy umpiring or refereeing, I should say. Got my Aussie rules hat on there. A few bits of dodgy refereeing really cost us in that one. So yeah, it was a bit of a mixed bag to finish the season, and I think our race was run pretty early on in terms of the playoffs, but a few mixed results to finish the season with. So what were your thoughts on how the season ended?
I think the way that the season ended really kind of just typified the way the whole season played out. Just inconsistent as a whole. So I
Yeah,
think like to get those three wins in a row was was good, but I think we were talking about like we needed to take at least some points against Forest and Norwich. We didn't take any, and then that gap starts to widen. We did they worked. I mean, they did well to stay within touching distance of that last playoff spot for as long as they did. When you consider what has been the season that has just finished, but um, yeah, I think like overall, it's sort of like you know the fact that we're sort of looking back and maybe feeling a little bit disappointed and that I think I'm not even sure what the gap ended up. I think we ended up a fair way off, on at the end of the final day. But that we were sort of talking about that was a distinct possibility was that was just a bonus for the season, I think, because I don't remember what our predictions were in episode one for
I
this
should
year,
have.
but
Yeah, I should have listened back to that before tonight, actually. But
I dare say that probably not probably none of us were really talking about being a genuine playoff chance. So
yeah,
I think most of us sort of said like if we, I think if I think we said like we'd be happy with mid-table, but we were probably thinking. I think most of us were sort of thinking like we're going to be like lower mid. In a, like finishing, I guess, similar to last season where we escaped relegation and we did okay, but still not anything miraculous. I think as a whole, I think we exceeded expectations for not only for us but probably for most fans and even like non-fans, other teams, fan groups and stuff just around that. People you talk to people and they say like with how things are going at your club, like to have done as well as you did and to get as high as you managed like at points in the season like was unreal.
yeah, definitely. And just looking at the table, so we ended up 12 points behind Derby in sixth, as well as a hefty goal difference, I guess, in the end. But looking at the table and that comment about where you sort of expected us to finish, and I see Reading in 20th on 47 points. And I remember when they signed Myler in the off season, and I sort of had a thought that he was going to a club where they would finish above us in the table. I was quite confident that they were going to finish above us in the table, and it's interesting to see, therefore, where our ambitions lay before the season began, or where our expectations lay before the season began. That around about 45 to 50 points was probably about where I expected us to get to, and Some seasons that sees you, drop down a division. Some seasons it doesn't. And I think Bolton and Ipswich was so poor this season that that sort of meant that a side like Reading did end up being safe on 47 points, but very easily could have been us this season. And without trying to name drop, when I actually got to meet Jackson Irvine before that Sheffield United game, and he also expressed that sort of um, disappointment that the season, if we had started playing as well as we did for the majority of the season at the start of the season, we really could have been in the playoffs quite comfortably. And the fact that it was just those first couple of months up till about October that we were dropping a lot of points, losing a lot of games, and I was looking at the run of fixtures before we came on tonight, and it is quite remarkable when you look at the amount of losses and draws that we were picking up through the first few months of the season. To end up where we did was quite remarkable, and to be even in the conversation of making the playoffs was quite remarkable. Um, and yeah, so sort of just going back on the way the season finished, I think you're right that it was very, symbolic of our season as a whole, that it was very patchy, very up and down, with, a couple of brilliant winning runs, but also a fair bit of disappointment with points dropped. That 2-0 lead against Rotherham, for instance, dropping it back to a 2-2 draw, sort of just, underlines how many results there are this season. We'll talk a bit later on our most disappointing results for the season, but a lot of them will be 2-2 draws where we were 2-0 up and then dropped points. There was the Villa game in January as well, where a very, very similar scoreline played out. Um, so it was a mixed end to the season, and I think it was basically as good as we could have made of it. We should have beaten Bristol City to close off the season with a win, which would have been great, but we didn't. 2-2 draw against Swansea, where it was actually us coming back to get the result, was great to see that there was still fight in the team. And yeah, we just sort of have to hope that that can give us a bit of momentum going into next season. If we can, we'll talk a bit later about the squad, but I think this season more than the last few, I think the core of the squad we should be able to keep together. It's about building the sort of the striking and the attacking power that we'll need for next season. But we'll talk about that a bit later. Um, as you said, so after 46 games to finish on 17 wins, 11 draws, 18 losses, 66 goals scored, 68 conceded, not too bad, finishing 13th. Um, it's about as good as we could have expected pre-season, I think.
Yeah, I guess I mean we could probably talk ad nauseum about the ups and downs and comings and goings of the season that was, but um, yeah, I think overall I'm pretty satisfied. I mean, and when you also consider like, so we brought in some guys, so like Tommy Elphick came in and he had a huge impact. Chris Martin, not so much,
Yeah.
and there was a few like Mark Pugh, like Pugh came in and he had a good impact, and then got injured and went back to Bournemouth. But so there was a bit of, even like with the guys that we brought in like on loan or acquired for the season, it like just hit and miss again, and it sort of just was, I guess, another like dot point to help underline like how inconsistent the season was. And I think that's like that was like that's just the difference between where we finished and the teams that are in the playoffs. It was consistency. Um, I don't know what else.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
don't know what
just
else is to say about.
yeah. Well, I mean, just on that in terms of recruitment, and you mentioned a couple there. Um, I think what we've done better this season than last potentially is I think that the quality of the player that we've brought in has been um, quite strong in general. I think in terms of the permanent purchases that we made, you look at Reece Burke and Geordie Device, for instance, who, pre-season, I think we were, scared that we only had, I think McDonald was our only fit centre back, I think, because we lost Dawson. Um, to bring in two centre backs to a club, both incredibly young, who towards the end of the season or from about the middle of the season, I would just look at a team sheet, and if we'd named the pair of them at centre back, I just knew we'd win the game because they just gave us so much defensive comfort and solidity that really let us sort of spring forward and attack quite well. And it's remarkable that the pair have really settled in as well as they have. And I think another name that you mentioned there, Elphick, really helped that by signing him on loan from Villa. I think he really gave us a bit of experience and guidance down back, which really let Device adapt to the English game a bit better. Because I know he had a very typical sort of shaky start to his City career, but by the end of it, he was one of our better players. Um, I think another one that came in that has done quite well. Um, I mean, Lehigh at right back has been quite solid for us as well. And then I guess yeah,
Kane.
Pew on loan. Kane has been good as well. So there's been a few that have come in and really done a job for us. So I would like to think that going into next season, I think it's pretty much a formality that we're going to lose Bowen at the very least. It's all about reinvesting that money wisely. And I feel a little bit more confident that we can do that this off season than I might have going into last off season.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be an interesting time over the next few months, but yeah, I think overall um, we did quite well. And I think you're right saying that the guys that we brought in a lot, like or we brought in this last couple of transfer windows, the quality has been an improvement on some of the players we brought in previously. I'm like you're looking at some of the guys. Um, I've even forgotten his name. The the young kid that came from
Stuart,
United. Um,
from United.
yeah, the and he's
Oh,
basically spent.
James Weir.
Yeah, that's who I'm like. A couple of guys like that who used like we've had him and there's been like others. It's not just him, but who we've looked, they've signed, and we've just looked at and gone, what? Why? Like, what do they
Yeah,
offer? But I think overall, the guys that came in this season have all been a quality that you could say, okay, they could bring something. I mentioned there was a couple that haven't maybe didn't necessarily show what they were capable of, but I guess like you're right. Like on the whole, I think we recruited pretty well this year, and that and especially in those like those key moments, like in that January window, and that like to bring in actually be able to get someone like Pew I think was like has got to be one of the best signings in the sense that like he came from Premier League club, we were able to get him on loan at a time, and then he went and had an impact. Like
yeah.
it doesn't always happen as smoothly as that.
Absolutely. So moving on from the players then, we'll discuss now sort of what your favorite win or the most satisfying win of the season was. And there's a couple that spring to mind for me, and yours might be one of these. I think the win against Leeds in January when Leeds were doing quite well and we were sort of in the middle of our winning streak as well. It was sort of an interesting clash to see who'd come out on top, and we quite comfortably put them away 2-0, courtesy of two Bowen goals. Um, the West Brom win back in November, I remember being quite a satisfying one as well because it was quite unexpected. I think at the time we were sort of just starting to get going, and West Brom, of course, being in contention for an automatic spot even. We knocked them off courtesy of a Campbell goal. And then the Bolton game in January, which whilst Bolton travelling quite poorly, it was just great to get one of those sorts of demolition wins and really sort of at full flight take them apart. With Grzycki getting two goals, Evandro, Martin, Bowen, and Dicko all on the score sheet as well. So Martin and Dicko getting on the score sheet was particularly satisfying, given their essentially droughts in front of goal, I guess. But those were sort of the ones that I picked out. Were there any others that came to mind for you, or was yours one of those ones?
Yeah, I'm I'm leaning in the same vein as you. I think uh, for me, probably the Leeds game is the most impressive. And just with the context that surrounded that game, I think we went into that game as the only two teams. This is may not be completely accurate, but the only two teams that had like that perfect form heading in. I think we are
Yeah,
both, five
six
wins from the
wins
last
or five
five
wins or
or
whatever it
whatever,
was. Yeah, yeah,
like I think at the time in the division, the only two teams that were had sort of that reign of form going. So it was, I think Leeds they might have even been on top at that time because they were for a large portion of the season, I believe. So I thought that was. probably that was my, I guess, like favorite win. Um, but I guess like the game against West Brom, that 1-0 was equally impressive. That might have actually been our best win. It was, I think, however it happened with Leeds, I think we kind of looked pretty comfortable in that game. But West Brom, I remember it being a lot more challenging.
Yeah.
I guess it was much more satisfying to sneak away with a 1-0 at that point. But I don't know. There's been some really good
The oth the
results this season.
The other one that comes to mind as well was the win against Sheffield Wednesday, where it was in a similar vein to the Bolton and Leeds games, where it was we're just flying in January, and I think it was just before Bruce took over, so they weren't necessarily going that well themselves. But I can't remember if it was 0-0 at halftime or 1-0 to us potentially, where it was one of those ones where they sort of challenged us, and we very easily could have had one of those typical City results where we were expected to go out and beat them, but we end up folding and losing rather disappointingly. But we actually managed to pull off quite a comfortable win in the end against them, and it was those sorts of games where it kind of reminded you of that 2015-2016 season where under Bruce we would just sort of swagger through the championship season and knock off everyone that came to the KCOM. And it was good to get that sort of win and nice to have that sort of mentality back, even if it was pretty brief. But yeah, there were quite a few satisfying wins this season. On the other hand, there was obviously more disappointing results, and a few of those come to mind as well. Um, I haven't so much looked at the huge losses. There was the 5-1 to Brentford, which was the main thumping that came to mind in terms of just seeing the players sort of drop their heads a little bit and worrying that, they were just going to let the season run away from them. But the more disappointing results to me were, and we sort of touched on them already, is there was a couple of games where we had a 2-0 lead that we let them slip. I think the Rotherham game, because it basically confirmed we weren't going to make the playoffs, but also the Villa game, because that Villa game, I suspect, was essentially the turning point in our season. And was it Device that went off injured in that game? I think one of our centre backs or somebody went off injured, and I'm completely blanking on who it was. I think it was Device. And we were up 2-0, and I think it was Device went off at halftime with an
Yeah, that
injury.
was. I think he went off, and that was possibly that might have even been. Was that the first? Was that when was it Mackenzie came on
Might have been, yeah.
and got
And
they
and we
scored an
and
own
we
goal?
yeah, and yeah,
No, I
we
didn't.
conceded two goals.
That's right. Yeah.
Um,
Let's have a look.
and yeah, and so that was sort of the moment where I think if we won that game, we were either going to be in sixth or very, very close to sixth place. And it was from that point that we then dropped the 2 points, and then it just sort of halted our momentum. And because I think before then we'd been on a great winning run. And dropping those points just really sort of put a dampener on things. So those are the three most disappointing results that I could think of, and I'd probably say that the Villa result was the most disappointing, which I think, considering we lost to them on the opening day of the season and where I thought the season would go, I think if I'd said pre-season that the most disappointing result would be a 2-2 draw away to Villa, I would happily have taken that. But yeah, I think that was mine. What about yours?
Um, yeah, I think probably for me, as disappointing as the that Villa comeback was, to me, it's probably more. It was probably more like the Rotherham that you
Yeah,
let a team that we like, especially having a 2-0 lead, not a team that you should be allowing back into the like game. Like I've thought overall our quality was, we had a lot more to offer than they did, and we just really there was points that they should have been in the bank. Like, and that I think that was what was most disappointing about that game was like Villa. They made the playoffs.
yeah,
They're a good team. And I guess you consider some of the circumstances because I did look it up. So Device went off injured just before halftime. Mackenzie came on, and then I think like the very next play,
yeah,
James Chester scored.
yeah.
Of
That's
course,
right.
it's always a former
Yeah.
City player.
And it was that mentality of if we can get in at halftime 2-0 up, I thought we would see it out, but it was, yeah, the fact that we conceded
Yeah.
so soon after. Had a big impact on the players. But yeah, you're right. And look, at the end of the day, I think the season on the whole, we've said it a couple of times, it's got to be viewed hugely positively. And I think we did a whole lot better than we thought we were going to during the preseason. So, in that sense, was any result particularly disappointing? I don't know. I think the positives outweighed the negatives, certainly, in general for the season. I think I know the answer to this one. It seems to be quite an obvious question. He cleaned up on awards night, but who was your player of the season? And I suspect we're both going to say Jared Bowen. So I might say, who was your player of the season? And also, who was your maybe most valuable, maybe not most valuable, most improved player? Maybe if we strip Bowen out of the equation for that one.
So you've got a couple of players listed here. The one that I would probably think of after Bowen is not on your list.
Okay.
After
Marshall?
Bowen, yes, that's who I would go. That's who I would go to after Bowen as I guess like you took like influential.
Yeah.
He was innovative. Like it was, I guess you would say, vintage Marshall. I suppose we hadn't seen a lot of it in his time. We said that multiple times for the season. Like when we've spoken about him, like I thought on the whole for the season he was unreal. Um, so and it wouldn't. I don't think it would have taken much of a dip in form to have for George Long to have got in there.
Yeah, and we were
So
calling for it quite early in the season, I
yeah,
remember.
so I think he maintained his form pretty well throughout the whole season, which is not easy to do. In the championship. So I think for me, like Bowen does, he blew me away again. Like he's like just he from last season like to this season like just stepped it up again and so he obviously like and their awards nights we picked up the players player the fans players award the every
Yeah.
player of the season award there was so he's sort of undoubtedly number one but I think an honorable mention should go to David Marshall for his contributions this season.
Yeah, definitely. And he was one that I had in mind when I was putting that list together, and I sort of was a bit more biased towards the attacking players. But it is remarkable when you think that this is essentially his only season as our keeper. I mean, he was our keeper for half a season in the Premier League, and then Jakupovic came back in, and then last season it was McGregor last season, wasn't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
because it was McGregor was injured during the Premier League. That's right. I forget sometimes, you know, that McGregor was around last season. It's remarkable how just one season removed, players can feel like they haven't been around for quite a while. Yeah, and
Oh, and
in terms of
it wouldn't be hard to want to disassociate yourself from McGregor at the
after
minute.
his latest antics, exactly. Well, it's funny that Marshall looks like he's potentially going up to Celtic, so it'll be funny in an old firm derby to have Marshall in one goal, McGregor in the other, and sort of have these ex-Hull City keepers facing off against each other. But no, Marshall's had a great season, and after even the first few games of it was a bit shaky from him, and we were sort of concerned and calling for Long to get a go in goal. And he turned it around spectacularly. So no, I definitely agree that he's probably our most improved or defied expectations the most, I guess you would say, and really put in a great season. Um, so I guess now we can sort of look ahead a little bit to next season, and we'll take a well, we've just had a very extended podcast break, but we'll take another break over the next month or so until preseason really ramps up and transfer window gets underway and Ehab realizes that we've got a couple of weeks left to sign players and starts to do something. But um, I thought we'd sort of look ahead a little bit because the reality is a lot of players are leaving. I sort of said at the start, I think I feel more confident this off season than I have the last couple because I think looking at the core of players we have, I think Long has impressed or at least done his job the last couple of games of the season, so that I don't feel too disheartened having him as our number one next season. I think Device and Burke down back are going to be an absolutely solid partnership. I think Mackenzie is back up if he can get fit. Sorry, McDonald. if he can get fit, will be great. Mackenzie as well will be, another year of development under him will be quite useful as well. I think if we could get another centre back though, that would be good just to have a bit of extra depth. Maybe if we could get Elphick if Villa go up, I don't know. In the fullbacks, Kingsley and Lehigh have proved themselves pretty reliable at different stages of the season. I think getting somebody else in to be a bit more flexible would be useful. I think Kane, whilst at the start of the season I might have thought it'd be good to get him on a permanent, I'm not as convinced at the other end of the season. I think defensively he was a little bit lacking at times. So a few depth players in defence potentially, but other than that, I think the main focus is obviously the holes that are going to be left by Campbell, Grzycki, and Bowen, who all look likely to depart. And it's pretty bleak when you look at who our top goal scorers were when you take out players expected to leave. And really, it was just Irvine on six, Dicko on two, and then Device on one, um, which is pretty scary when you think we only had three goal scorers last or this season just passed who will be on our books next season. Obviously, we could look at getting Pew back in on a permanent deal. We could obviously look to sign a couple of decent strikers. There's a lot of options and a lot of ways that we can go about replacing those players. But at the end of the day, if we can sell Bowen for anything around 15 to 20 million, I really think we need to be investing at least 2 or 3 million of that in one player, and then the rest of it, yes, if it goes to the alums to pay down the debt, whatever, that's okay. But get some decent free players in with, half decent wage packets, and I think that's the way forward. Um, I think it's very optimistic to look just to the youth team to fill the gaps in the team. I know we've got Keane Lewis Potter, who looks like a great prospect. I don't know if you can throw him straight in, but we said the same about Bowen, and that worked out, so you never know. But I think our attacking options are where we really need to focus our off-season recruitment. But defensively, central midfield, I think we're looking pretty decently stocked, and it kind of gives us this core of players that hopefully we can build on for next season and actually get some momentum and some unity and some good squad spirit going.
Yeah. I think, yeah, I mean, you pretty much sort of hit the nail on the head that when you look at uh, who is technically still under contract, um, but likely to leave, like Bowen, I, if I had a house, I'd probably put it on Bowen leaving before the season starts. Um, I'm, I just can't see no, I can't see no one coming in for him after the season that he had.
Well, yeah, and I
Um,
think he's already been linked to a handful of Premier League
yeah,
clubs as it is. Yeah.
there's I've seen Leicester and Tottenham, whether that's actually a thing. I mean, but that was been going on for ages. Those some of those links, but yeah, there's been a few. Um, Campbell, they reckon this like talking to him, but it's going to be one of those where I guess they're going to walk up and it'll be a token offer of if you would like another contract, we will offer you one at 10% of what your current contract's worth or something because like they they have to cut costs
Yeah.
significantly for next season, and I think uh, that'll be probably this why Grzycki will is likely to leave um, in uh, in the coming transfer window as well.
Henriksen looks like he's got an offer overseas as well.
Yeah, Henriksen, I think they basically opted for to they activated his extension basically on the premise that they know that he's going next year, and I guess they're going to try and at least like get be like, oh, we'll take 1 million, or whatever. They're gonna try and get a little bit of a transfer fee instead of letting him go on a free. That's
Yeah.
pretty much that. I guess who's gone? Evandro has already officially left. Adam Curry left.
That one
Uh,
surprised me a little bit. I thought he would be another one of our
yeah,
youth prospects to come through, but yeah.
but I think like overall you're pretty pretty right that we're going to be looking for mostly attacking players. Probably, yeah. I think like you pretty much sort of got it. Like you probably like another wide defender. I probably like if you can find. I probably want another centre mid. I've pretty just been pretty disappointed in John Terral
Yeah.
as a whole. Like he's had a couple of really nice moments, but he's either been injured or ineffective for the most part of his City career. So someone in there, but like the priority has got to be in the that forward line. So and also the priority needs to be getting Adkins to put his signature on a dotted line.
Well, I was going to come to that next, is that the most important signature is probably the gaffer, and it sounds as if from all reports the club has basically said, here's the offer. If you want it, you can sign it. If you don't, you know, thanks very much for your season and a half. And it's pretty remarkable that in the 18 months that he's been here, he's turned the public opinion about himself around so sharply. And there's an interesting article in the Hull Daily Mail today about the fact that there's, you know, a strong reason that he may want to stay because of that affinity he has with the fans. That after a pretty rocky start with the club, even the early months of this season, he's really sort of turned it around and really has a strong connection with the supporters now. So um, it's all sort of on him to decide whether he wants to stay. Obviously, I suspect his wage will have been significantly reduced. I think there's some talk that there might not be a contract on offer for his assistant manager, Andy Crosby, I think it is, which would obviously be something that might cause him to hesitate because I know managers generally rely on or have very strong working relationships with their assistant managers. So telling him that we're going to replace your assistant with somebody that we've picked who might be a lot cheaper might not fly for Adkins. So it is a very tough situation. I respect, though, that he's also recognised the fact that the club needs to know one way or the other quite soon or quite early in the preseason so that the club can make decisions on who to appoint, start making transfer policy decisions, all things like that. So I would be hopeful that we'll find out in the next 7 days. Even I would think I wouldn't think he'd want to leave it too much longer than that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the way that he's, I guess, handled the situation indicates that he's intending on staying as long as, the contract is appropriate. He's never once, he's never once really indicated that he didn't want to stay. He's always said, I'm acting as if I'm going to be here next season. I've got to put, I'm identifying players. I'm doing this. I'm talking about long term. So you can only assume that he wants to stay. It's just, yeah, it becomes that whether or not the Allams are going to do something which they're prone to do, which is sacrifice the long term, for the short term, essentially. Because
So yeah, sorry.
I was just going to say, because I think like when you look at what he's done in such a short time, if you were able to continue that, like Adkins seems to be able, he seems to have, as you were saying, like he's gelled into the team, into that community, into that environment really well, and so that's sort of what, if you actually want to um, keep growing, you sort of need that continuity. So I think he seems to be the right guy for the job. It just what the Allams are like.
Indeed. So I guess we'll wrap up by sort of looking ahead at where we sort of expect the club to finish next season, what sort of ambitions we have for next season ahead of the transfer window, ahead of potential Adkins re-signing, ahead of a potential sale of the club. All of these sorts of possibilities are sort of swirling in the future. But what would we sort of be satisfied with next season? Is it as simple as saying if we're a championship club for the following season that's all we can take out of next season? Is it to try and build on this season and achieve a top half finish to achieve a playoff spot? Is it to achieve promotion? What's your sort of ambition for next season?
Um, I think the problem with this question is only that it's it's not really about what my ambition is. It becomes about what the ambition of the club is, and they've already indicated that. they're not looking to basically really to spend, they're not looking to spend money to push for for the, push for promotion or push, for a strong. They're looking to cut costs and try and be a sustainable championship club essentially, who occasionally might have a good season and be able to um, you know you know yo-yo up into the Premier League and then drop down and sort of. So I think, like honestly, like I was looking at this earlier and I thought like if we achieved a similar position next season as to what we have this season, I'd probably consider that to be a resounding success. I would be disappointed that we hadn't taken advantage of the steps that we have, this year and continued to try and push forward. But I guess at the same time, I do understand the difficulties and the financial issues that come into play. So I don't know, it's a tough one overall.
Yeah, I think if we are to lose Bowen, if we're losing Grzycki, if we're losing Campbell, if we're losing all of these attacking players, and we've sort of, looking at our goal scoring options currently at the club and potentially bringing a few in the window, I think if we were able to achieve a top 12 finish or top 13, which is where we finished this season, I agree. I think it would be a success. I think the fact that we have to cost cut, and I think this is the first season under the Allams where we won't have any Premier League income, which will be quite interesting because even when they took over the club, I think we were still receiving parachute payments. Um, uh, Actually, well, yeah, 09-10 we got relegated, so 10, 11, 11, 12, 12, 13. Yeah, it would have been 3 seasons with parachute payments. So this is the first time under the Allams that we don't have any, which will be quite interesting to see. Um, I think the cost cutting that's required, it's remarkable. I mean, I saw a tweet about all of the clubs at the moment financially struggling, and you look at your Boltons, you look at Birmingham got deducted points. You look at, clubs in lower leagues like Bury and Notts County and other clubs like that, that as awful as the Allams are in a lot of ways, the biggest criticism, well, sorry, I'll correct that. One of the biggest criticisms leveled against them in terms of on-field is the fact that they're, quote unquote asset stripping and they're selling off all of our best assets. And whilst that makes us so much less competitive on the field, it's at least leaving us in a position where we're, somewhat sustainable off field. And you look at a lot of the clubs in the division's wages to income ratio, and I'm getting very technical and boring with this, but the fact of it is that we are, I think, if not the lowest, one of the lowest in the division in terms of what we earn versus what we pay the players. And the fact that what we bring in isn't actually, sorry, what we're actually spending on players isn't actually more than we bring in. So we're actually at a sustainable level. That's with the last of the parachute payments, and next season that will drop, but our spending will drop in line with that. And so this is not me sort of praising them in any significant way, but it is to say things could be a whole lot worse if we were mismanaged more than we are. That we could be in a situation like a Bolton, like a Reading, like a whoever, where there are players not getting paid, where there are staff not getting paid. And I think if we were to finish in a similar position next season on the back of, you know, buying smartly, buying cheaply, putting together piece by piece this squad, which I think Adkins has sort of said. He sort of said, I don't really care to a huge extent what the budget is. I just care that there is a plan and a process to get us back to the Premier League. And if that means, buying bargain basement players, bringing through youth players, putting together a squad, he's okay with that as long as there's that sort of ambition in place and that plan in place. And if we can sort of start to see that, if we've got this nucleus now of these solid defensive players who I really think can sort of thrive next season, it's all about bringing in some young, attacking, hungry players. And if we can do that on the cheap, great. And we can start to build a good squad at quite an affordable and sustainable and responsible sort of manner, then that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I think overall, like as you pointed out a couple of times, you're just happy not to be in, a position like Bolton, who's gone into administration, starts next season with at minus 12 points.
Incredible, yeah. and I
You
have a
know, so
feeling that they're looking at further penalties as well for not playing that game against Brentford, which is remarkable when you look at the context of that, and that's the players making a stand to get, the staff of the
yeah,
club paid, and the league is viewing that as something that needs to be punished. It's just, I could understand as a general principle, a club not fulfilling its fixtures needs to get punished, but I think surely context and extenuating circumstances need to get taken into
yeah,
account. But yeah, so I think I'm very thankful in some respects for the way that the club is at least managed off the field in terms of its financial health. Remains to be seen what that financial health looks like next season without parachute payments. So I could be taking back those words very quickly if we're suddenly, you know, having our backsides fall out behind us. But um, for the moment, if we can repeat this season next season, that will be a huge success, and hopefully we can see some new stars emerge in the club. We've had great season 2 seasons with Bowen and Grzycki lighting up the wings. Here's to finding the next Bowen. Here's to Lewis Potter, hopefully thriving in any sort of role or action that he gets with us next season, and some other youth players coming through, and hopefully unearthing a few lower league stars to join the first team.
yeah. I think like we like on top of everything else that we've just spoken about, we should be really happy with how our academy's performing in terms of like I guess like in their competition they're maybe not performing that well, but basically all of the guys that have been selected to step into the first team have on the whole performed very well for where they're at in their careers. Dan Batty is one who this year was just stepped up out of nowhere, and impressed until he got a few injuries. I think he got a back injury which kept him out for a little while. But this is like continuing on from like that was Bowen a couple of years ago. Sort of
Yeah,
just on the fringes and then stepped in and made an impact, and then it's just that continuation. We got Dan Batty ahead. Mackenzie came in. There was another defender, young defender, whose name has eluded me. But Fleming, I think Brandon Fleming
yep,
made a couple of appearances. And there was a couple. I think and guys, even if they didn't play, they were still getting onto the bench for first time. I think Max Sheaf was on there a couple of
yeah,
times.
Sheaf, I was
Like
gonna say, yeah.
so and
And
so
even
there's
even players not at the club. So United purchasing Daniel James from Swansea. People might remember that James was on our books as a 16-year-old, and I think we lost him to Swansea for very, very little money because of rules around different academy statuses. And I think they were category A or category B when we were C, or however it worked. But I think we've got a sell-on clause with him. So the fact he's going to United for I think 15 million gives us 750,000, which doesn't sound like a huge amount, but every pound is more than we had before he was sold. So um, players from the academy going to other clubs and going on to bigger and better things as well. So yeah, huge props to the way the academy's come on in the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, and I suppose the other thing with sell-ons is you think about
Maguire,
Maguire. Yeah, I
yeah,
was just, he's the big one that's been linked to some of the more cash-rich clubs in the Premier League.
yeah.
Um, I mean,
I wonder if we would have one with Robertson, but I don't know if Robertson's particularly
I,
going anywhere.
I would be very, very surprised
Do you
if
reckon? Do you reckon we
anyone
would?
was able to lure Robertson away from
Yeah.
Liverpool at this stage because
Do you reckon
he's
we would
been.
have?
Yeah.
I know when I think it was when Benteke went to Liverpool or something, or maybe when he went to Palace, and Palace wanted a clause put in that if they made Europe or something, they had to pay more money or something like that. Um, do you reckon we would have been smart enough to put in a clause that if Liverpool won the Premier League or if Liverpool won the Champions League, we'd get extra money for him within the first couple of years? I mean, you see those clauses sometimes, but I just don't see us as having thought that through.
Yeah, I guess some of that would come down to the clubs that are involved, and I feel like Hull City we would have a hard time negotiating that
Yeah,
aspect of a clause.
especially with the Liverpool. Yeah, I think Robertson would have just been like, "Well, yeah, I'm heading to Liverpool, and you guys can try and make the best of that situation."
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure like that's he sort of said like if it had fallen through, it would have been fine. But he pretty much said like as soon as he heard Liverpool was involved, he was like he'd pretty much packed his bags.
Yeah,
He was like it's and like I don't blame him. An opportunity like that doesn't come around very often, and like you just look at what he's done there in the 2 seasons, been like two Champions League finals, like this and that and everything in between, like and he, social media's putting him down as best left back in the world and all these sorts of things, and you're going, man, that's and he was at us, and we bought him for 2 million or something from,
yeah, it
you
is
know.
funny to think about like that. So yeah, thank you for joining me for this one, Dan, and thanks for wrapping up what has been an overall positive season, I think, for the club.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, and just keep following them. Keep following City.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for listening in after another season. Apologies that our episodes have been a little bit more patchy this season than in previous seasons. I think as real life starts to take more and more of a hold on us, it gets more difficult to schedule in episodes. And I do want to give a shout out just before we finish to Amber Nectar wrapping up this year after many, many years of providing us with great Hull City content. And in fact, it was their podcast that inspired us to start Tigers Down Under. So do have to give them a massive thank you for that, and a congratulations on a great, great media career. But after all that, well, thank you very much for listening in, and we'll be back for the start of pre-season. So until then, come on, City. You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
City's on fire. We're going higher and higher. There's no turning back.